Hello there, everybody. Welcome to the Pastoral Thoughts Podcast. This is your host, Jack Young, and here today with Brother Paul Scott. We're going to be talking about missions today, hoping to be encouragement and a blessing to you. We talk about rethinking missions, and got an important announcement. We have passed 10,000 views on YouTube, so a big landmark day today. And if you're listening to this episode and you would like a copy of Brother Scott's book, we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the stuff that's in this book. I have read this book, I believe, at least a couple times. I definitely thumbed it over since I knew he was doing a podcast with him today. But it's called Missions by Design, the Biblical Pattern for Fulfilling the Great Commission. If you email us at pastorthoughtsmail@gmail.com, we will send you a free copy to the first 10,000 emails. Or I think I have 3 books. So the first 3 people to email me.
We'll get you some more. It's okay.
Well, we're going to send you a copy of that book. But love to hear from you. And thank you for the folks that are tuning in and watching, and then also listening on their different podcast apps and things. Well, good to have you with us, Brother Scott.
Thank you, Pastor. It's good to be here. And I'm especially honored because I've seen some of the other guests you've had in this great chair.
Yeah.
Wow, I feel really honored.
Yeah, but you're a Vietnamese celebrity. You were telling me about
that's there.
How warmly you are received, and you might not get any attention stateside, but they know who you are in Vietnam. That's a good deal. And you just came back from a trip.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about like the whole evolution of your work in missions and how
Sure.
you got started in missions and
Sure.
Your experience?
Okay. I'll try to be brief. I'm not good at it, but I'll try. As a young Christian, I thought missionaries, and I still do, I thought missionaries were the greatest people. That was the top. And I always wanted to be a missionary. And as I approached graduation at a local Bible institute, we seriously considered the mission field. Mm-hmm. Long story short, I'll cut through it, but we went to Vietnam and as a survey trip, my wife and I, and we hated it. It was terrible. Well, I'm a country bumpkin. I'm a farmer. Here I am in this country that just opened to Americans. They thought we were CIA. We were followed. Mm-hmm. It was just difficult. The weather was terrible. We had beggars pulling on our sleeves and all.
And what year was this?
1998.
Okay.
And yet, I think toward the last days when I taught English at the hospital, I had a little Dr. Liu, Boxy Liu. She was one of the students in our English class, and she pulled on my sleeve, and I turned to give her the eye, like that's what you do with beggars. You just give them the eye, like stop pulling on my sleeve.
Off.
Yeah. Oh, it's Dr. Liu. And she looked up to me. She was about 4 foot tall. And she goes, "Now, Mr. Paul, we need you in Vietnam. You must come back," she said. And I said, okay. I want to be where I'm needed.
Yeah.
And so we went there. We came back, and we began the traditional missions route. Mm-hmm. We were part of a board from a southern state, and that's okay. We didn't know anything, and we went around a little bit. A lot of our money was Kodak money. Back in the late 90s, we were making money hand over fist. Yes. But we went out as traditional missionaries, and we were going to plant churches, et cetera, et cetera. You know the story. Mm-hmm. And we got there.
You're going to plant indigenous churches, right?
Yeah. Yes. Well, I'm not the only one that's used that phrase. But, we failed. We failed miserably. We found that the people there was a couple of Americans there. A lot of it was, they were less than honest. I'll be kind.
Yeah.
And we were really disillusioned, and we were really homesick.
And their lack of honesty, because you understand that there is pressure on a missionary that lives on a field to put something in his newsletter and also make everything sound fantastic, because that's his his livelihood is actually not being successful on the field, but keeping the support comes in that takes care of his family. But did that hurt you because you thought they had something they didn't have, and they were?
I always held them on a high pedestal, and to find out that they were running a con. I'm not saying every missionary is like that. But
sure,
these guys were, because there's no accountability. People thought back then Vietnam War. They would ask us, "Is there still shooting?" There hadn't been shooting in 25 years.
Sure,
but that was still that mindset. Like, if you go to Vietnam, that's like crazy. We'll throw money at you. And they were glad to take the money.
Yes.
So anyway, we came back. We were there, 6 months? And we came back disillusioned, hurt, and just confused. We had good motives, I'm sure, as good as anybody else, and we had good training. Of course, I was out of Bible school, so I knew everything.
And you were working at Kodak.
I was working at Kodak. Yeah.
As an engineer?
Engineering tech, yep.
Engineering tech.
Yep.
And you're making good money.
Yeah.
Great blue-collar job.
Yeah.
And you have 4 daughters.
Yeah.
So you're talking about your life, and not only your life, but also the life of your family.
Yeah. It was hard on my family. The 4 daughters were so young, but they were blondes, and they were targets of just curiosity.
Sure.
The old ladies in the market, they walk through the market and they do things like, we started them in skirts because that's what Baptists do. Girls wear skirts. And we found out when they jump on the motorbike, which is a transportation, the skirts start flapping around and not very modest. And then we'd go to the market and they'd, I don't know if they don't appreciate me telling the story, but I think it's okay. Some of the old women would pick up their skirts and they're curious what kind of panties they wear.
Yeah.
The foreigners.
Yeah.
That's pretty traumatic for a girl.
Sure.
So we went to slacks.
Yeah, pretty quick.
And we lost a couple churches.
I saw your picture, brother.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we came back hurt and disillusioned, and I determined to just think that was just this crazy thing. I'm never going to do that again. And I ended up working. And at that time, the terrorist had hit the towers.
Okay.
And there was no work. I was moving rocks for a landscaper. Here I go from being a hero, big shot, to literally lifting rocks for landscaping. And then I pastored a church, little church. They had heard that I was home and if I could fill in, and I filled in. You know the story. And pretty soon I'm the pastor down there. And I enjoyed it. I was there 3-4 years, and that church had 2 Asian missionaries that we kept. We kept all the missionaries, but 2 of them were from Asia. And one Wednesday night, I mentioned out loud in front of the congregation, those missionaries ought to, we don't send them a lot of money, but they ought to at least send us a letter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the secretary, she's in the front row. She raises her hand and goes, "Pastor, we have a confession to make." I go, "Oh, really? This is we? You're right in here. We have been hiding their letters." Yeah, that's the way I said. Same look, Well, tell. What's going on? Well, and the people, by the way. She says, "Well, we're afraid that if you read the letters about Asia, that your heart will turn back to Asia, and you'll leave us. You'll quit here and you'll go back to Vietnam and so on. And we don't want you to leave and so on." I go, "That's ridiculous. Give me the letters." We read the letters, and I read the letters, and my heart I started getting interested in how the Vietnamese were doing.
Yeah.
And within a month or so, I went back to Vietnam to check on my friends.
Okay.
And on the way back from that trip, when I came back, I gathered the men of the church and said, "We need to transition. I've got to go back to Vietnam." And my heart is still in Vietnam. I can't love you and them. It's not fair. It's not fair to you, really. It's not fair to me. I can't do both.
Yeah.
I'm still in that quandary. I want to help everybody.
Yeah.
but I really want to help the Vietnamese. What the story of the book is, when we went back the second time, and we did the deputation. This time we learned a lot. I was surprised that when I went to Bible school, a lot of my friends became missionaries. And when I would meet them years later, they were broken. They were hurt. They started out great. They were heroes when we left.
Mm-hmm.
But like us, they had to come back. And usually it was some emotional problem, spiritual problem. A lot of it is the lady isn't prepared to be away from her mom that long. The men, maybe they can go farther, maybe not. But it's tough.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to go across the boundaries. And we found that we could just help the Vietnamese, just do projects with them. And we actually had more influence with them that way. We actually could do more because all of our resources wasn't in just taking care of our kids and so on.
Your household.
Yeah, just
Right.
security and airfare. But I can just go over there. We can do a lot. And they can have a lot more influence.
And you can be in a supportive role for
Exactly.
the actual indigenous.
But it doesn't have my
pastors
name
and-
on it.
and
It has
churches
Jesus' name on it.
So nobody gets the credit except for Jesus?
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Well, you say that, but that's not a lot, but we did lose some supporters.
Sure.
And that's okay. That's, God bless them. Thanks for the help, But when I came back the second time, I had a old gentleman pastor say, "What you're doing there," he says, "does it work and is it biblical?" Which are fair questions.
Mm-hmm.
I knew it worked
Mm-hmm.
to support the nationals, train them, get out of the way. Because as a foreigner, when I go to Vietnam, a village, I'm more trouble than I'm a help
Yeah.
to the church. Because if I visit the pastor's house, he's in trouble. As soon as I leave, the police are there. Who is he? What do you want? They give him flack. They give him grief. I'm better off to stay in the city, bring them in, a little more freedom. I can teach them something. They can go back. No harm done. But I studied the Bible. Can you imagine that?
That's a crazy concept.
I looked for, I'll just be kind. I looked for the American method.
American style.
Yeah. I called it colonial
style.
And it was developed in the colonial period.
And during the colonial era, if people would study this, I know Gulshan Lal, who he takes he's, out of our church here, and he takes trips to India. He taught a 6-week deal last winter about the movement of missions. But during the colonial era, people need to understand that 85 to 90% of all Christians were in the Western world. It was an unreal amount of Christians compared to the other populations, where now today, really the majority of Christians are outside of the Western world. Yeah. And China has more Christians than the United States does. Now they have more people, but they have 75 million Christians in China. These are evangelical Christians.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a style.
Well, there was a time when the pioneering style was necessary.
Yes. And so if you're Ed Naram Judson, you're getting on a ship to go on to Burma,
right.
and it is a 3-month journey over water.
Exactly.
And you're burying wives and children along the way, and then you get into a people land. There's not even a language school for you to go to or anything. You're starting from scratch. You're pointing towards this, and they're telling you a word for coffee cup.
Yeah.
And you're writing that down, and he goes, amazing man, 7 years.
Yeah.
Before his first convert, and then starts the translation work and all these things. So there was an era where they had to work with the time.
Yeah. And these guys were great guys. And I'm not saying, I want to be clear, I love missionaries. There are guys even today that are on the field under the traditional style setup, and they are successful. Mm-hmm. And God bless them. They're exceptional people that can work despite our hindrances of our poor training towards them. Mm-hmm. But I wrote the book, and I'm really addressing the other groups, people like myself that are just average, that have gone and they've tried hard. They've taken their families far away, and they've gone through that whole process, and they feel like they've failed. and they come back and it just doesn't work out, and they're embarrassed or ashamed. They end up working in the third shift at Walmart, and that's it. It's like God has better things.
Mm-hmm. And so initially, I mean, they went away to college, some of them, and gave 4 years of their lives to schooling. And then when they took their wife and went around the country and their hometown heroes, they're going away to the mission field. They get sent off and they get to this area, and it's just so much different than they're used to.
It's like being on the moon.
They might as well have went to the moon.
Yep.
And the culture shock kicks in. Yeah. It takes years and years and years to learn the language, and then even after that, you have to integrate into the culture, and it doesn't feel like you ever do, and they feel like a failure because they just have a handful of people. They've been there for a decade.
Yep. And the children go crazy because they're third culture kids. They don't fit in the States. They've been away. They don't fit over there because they're not them. So they end up in gangs or gay or whatever. They find their own family groups outside of God's plan.
Yes. And so you're trying to tell me that this is not the model that we see in the Bible.
I couldn't find the American model. Again, I can find good people with good hearts. But I found quite the opposite. I don't find people crossing cultures. There are a few. Jonah cross cultures. But Jonah's not our typical.
Did he go on deputation first?
He didn't bring a cargo container. I don't even hear Mrs. Jonah, you know.
And he didn't pack a suitcase or anything.
I don't even think he liked where he went.
No.
And I doubt that he stayed.
No.
And even when Jesus sent him out, you know, in groups of 2 initially, then others, they came back.
There was a circuit.
When they came back, they didn't say, "What are you guys doing here?"
And another thing too is pack neither purse nor script.
Yeah.
So he says that the workman is worthy of his hire. He says if they don't receive you into the town, that means that they economically receive you, meaning they're housing you and feeding you and taking care of you inside that town. Shake the dust off your clothes and go into the next town, for that town is not worthy of you. And like you said, they're coming back.
We haven't even talked about finances and resources. Churches like this one, we don't have unlimited resources. We have an unlimited God, but we have a budget each year.
Right.
For what it costs to send a family around the country for 4-5 years now,
probably $500,000
to gain support, to gain pledges, and then all the stuff that it costs them, and then they go over to wherever far away is stand, and what if they last 1 year? What if something happens? And things do happen, whether it's COVID, whether there's a change in government, or whether it's internal, whether they just can't. God doesn't.
A lot of times health stuff too, because you get to, let's say if you're going to a third world country and your body is used to living in a first world country, you are going to get sick.
Yeah.
That's just a reality.
You're definitely going to get homesick. But
yes,
we were homesick big time. And I think it's good. We should be homesick. God made our homes. You know, we miss our families. He wants us to miss our families.
If you go back to that biblical model, you know, Jeremiah said, "My eye affecteth my heart."
Yeah.
You know, if you look in Scripture, most time people are ministering to their own family, of their own kindred, you know, of their own kin. And I think of, you know, here we're in northern New York, and sometimes we have guys come up from the south and they'll take a church and they're going to show us Yankees how it's done, and they wash out. I mean, I know some good guys, talented, that come up here, and, you know, they do a good job for a short time period, but then, I mean, we're talking the same country.
Right.
And so
it's not that big a cultural change. Can you imagine going far away overseas?
Right.
It's different. It's difficult. At first, it's a challenge. It's interesting and fun. It's cool, but it wears you down. The idea of being a foreigner, no matter how long you're there, you're still the foreigner. You could be there for 10 years. They'll call you the foreigner that's been here 10 years.
Well, even if you lived there your whole entire life in Vietnam, you know, you could have been born there almost and lived your whole life. You're still not Vietnamese.
Yeah.
There's very few melting pots for countries anymore. And so you are not going to fit into that land.
No, I think there's going to be somebody that would object and say, well, I know somebody that went to far away is stand, and they're doing. Isn't that great?
Well, there's an exception to every rule.
Yeah, they're good.
Just
good
like
for you.
just like if I said men are stronger than women, well, so I know a woman that could beat you in arm wrestling. Well, I bet you do, but there's 10,000 out there who I could beat.
Those East German Olympians.
Exactly. So
I am Helga von steroid.
There's always an outlier, and there's always someone that really what they're doing is they're proving the rule because they're in the minority. But yeah, you go again. I would think that if we went back to the biblical model, the biblical method, that's where I picked up your book, and I've been thinking this for years because I'm looking in the Bible and trying to figure out the American style of missions, and I do not see it anywhere in the pages of Scripture. Even Jesus in his earthly ministry, if there was someone from outside of where he was immediately ministering,
look at the maniac of Gadara.
He said, go to your people.
Go back to your own people. It's like, what?
And tell them what great things God has done for you.
You didn't even give them a tithe envelope.
No.
How can you do that?
No. And
I know it.
Then even in the Great Commission, he says, tarry ye in Jerusalem, and, go ye therefore into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. Well, Peter did that on Pentecost, and he preached to 18 different nations, languages, and tongues in Jerusalem.
Yes.
And then those people went back to where they had come from with the message of the gospel. And
so when Christ said, go ye into all the world, for them, the world isn't geographic. It's not the earth. The world is the people.
Mm-hmm.
And they were there at Pentecost. They were there.
Mm-hmm.
For them, the Jews would they have to cross the street or whatever. They're in their city. I think Josephus said there was 1 million visitors every year. Just go talk to them.
Yes.
It's just like the Ethiopian eunuch. He went up to Jerusalem. He was searching. He came back. He still didn't have the answer, but God sent Philip.
Philip the evangelist.
Yep.
And again, he didn't pack his bags or anything. He just ran out in the desert.
He met him halfway at Gaza. He never really left Israel proper. And then when he was done, he went, guess what? He went up the coast to his home where he lived, Caesarea. That's where Paul would find him later. So these guys are always going home.
And so someone say, the Apostle Paul is missionary. We call him his missionary journeys. As someone, if you ask a missionary, if you said, where is your, where do you get your model of ministry from?
Yeah.
They're probably going to point to the Apostle Paul, would you say?
Usually. Yeah, Paul. Yeah, I think he's probably the most popular. Yet Paul identifies himself over and over again as apostle. The word missionary is never even used in the Bible.
No.
So we're kind of on thin ice, and we declare that. And even if you wanted to use Paul, none of us go out as Paul.
We don't have apostolic authority. Because I remember talking to a guy one time.
We have wives and children, and
yeah. And he was commissioned by Christ to the Gentiles to be the minister to the Gentiles, be the sent one to the Gentiles.
Yeah.
And of course, you read about this in the book. He never left the confines of the Roman Empire.
Right.
And when he wanted to go to Bithynia, the Holy Spirit forbade him.
Yes.
That was unknown territory outside the Roman Empire.
Yeah, that was a restive state. They were not getting along with the Romans.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, Paul immediately meets Lydia.
Mm-hmm.
It's from the Lydian kingdom. That includes Bithynia. She would be a local seller of purple. She has the resources. And later in Philippians, when he writes to them, he thanks the women that ministered to them, to the Bithynians. That would be Lydia, I believe.
Yeah.
And I could go on. There's many, many examples. We talked about them. It's just,
I
found a lot of examples, but I couldn't find any American-style examples.
No. And then also the support style is unheard of in the Bible. In fact, it is the complete reverse.
Yeah.
Here's something I did on my own. This is real missions giving. So Jesus sends the 12. They were supported by the hearers. They were supported by the senders. They were supported by the people who they went to. So it'd be, if we're going to send somebody overseas, well, we don't need to give them any support because whoever they're going to go minister to, they're the ones that are going to be supporting them. That's how Jesus sent out them 2 by 2. And also you don't see that done as well. In Acts chapter number 6, when they're electing deacons, which is interesting, all the deacons are Greek.
Mm-hmm.
They're voted in by the Greek widows. So
Yes.
even the Greek widows, guess who they're voting for? People like themselves,
Exactly.
the Greeks. So you have the law of the ox and the workman.
Yep.
Where Christ said that whoever ministers unto you spiritual things, you meet unto them carnal things. And then, workman is worthy of his reward, and whoever labors well among you, meaning labors to you in the word, they're worthy of double honor, double honorarium. And so they should be supported. The principle of hospitality in the Bible.
And even when Paul speaks of taking an offering, the offering was for the home church in Jerusalem.
That's right.
Where there was a famine in Jerusalem. So he goes out to the...
So it actually is
he
it's
goes
the
up,
opposite. It's the opposite.
And you should help the mother church. They need help right now. Okay.
So it's a principle of being in debt to whoever was a spiritual blessing to you.
Exactly.
So the church in Acts actually sent out the original apostles, and Paul was an Israelite, and so they're raising money for the sending place.
Yes.
So it's complete reverse. And then it's also the same principles in Philemon, where Paul asks a request. He says, if Onesimus done anything, put it on my account. Mm-hmm. He says, and I want to remind you, you owe me your own soul. And so there was a debt. Yeah. I've seen people use Philippians chapter number 4 as proof text for support sent to missionaries, where it's actually... Once again, it is a reverse, because when Paul went into the regions of Macedonia, and particularly Corinth, he writes to the Corinthians saying, I robbed from other churches when I came to you, meaning it was unnatural for another church to pay for your preacher, but since you were so carnal and backward, I had to get support from Philippi.
Yeah.
But let's go back to Philippi. Philippi was the church that Paul founded and started with Lydia. Mm-hmm. And since Paul led them to Christ, they felt a debt to the Apostle Paul. So even after he left their midst, they continued to support him and to be a blessing to him. So you see the flow of missions churches are actually, in the different order. And it goes back again to we're Baptists, and Baptists believe there's 2 offices. Mm-hmm. I guess there's a few out there that believe there's 3, I guess pastor, elder, deacon, whatever. But we hold 2 offices here. So pastors and deacons. And pastors and deacons are an actual thing with also actual requirements in Scripture. You can make the argument there's 24 different requirements for a pastor. If you look at if you look at Peter and Paul and look at their requirements for a pastor, and then also there's a list of requirements for deacons.
And I know where you're going.
You're
going to go to the M word, aren't you?
Yes. And so they work with a real flock.
Maybe in the Apocrypha.
Right. With real people that they're accountable to.
Yeah.
They have a real family, a real church family. There's real accountability there. Yeah. And so if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, right, there's going to be problems. But if you make up a word, missionary, you get to define terms as to what a missionary actually is.
Yes. And
so you're actually adding to Scripture when you say the word missionary.
Well, that's it. You're doing something that the world does. They're using their imagination to reform what God said.
Right.
And that's not good.
And if you look at the history, I was talking to evangelist Brian Sharp earlier today, but if you look at the history of the word missionary, he says it goes back to the Turks when they invaded Jerusalem. These Muslims that came in, and these imams were called janissaries. And so the janissary was essentially, for Jews and Christians, you convert to Islam or you die. Mm. And they even made their way into Europe, and then really the Crusades were probably they were just a response by Europe to try to beat the Muslim hordes back to their own territory. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing, the Crusades. I mean, bad things were done. Hello, that's war. But so the Catholic response to the janissaries were missionaries. Mm-hmm. And so that's actually a Roman Catholic term. And as they came in, it was the same thing, convert or die.
Yeah.
And
we never went that far.
So Yeah. Well,
we should try that next time.
Well, I tell you what, it worked in different places. I tell you what, South America,
Central
wherever.
America, yeah,
exactly. I mean, those missionaries came in.
As long as you're talking on that subject, like you're a pastor, somebody comes in and they're in debt, or they have money problems. As a pastor, what you're going to do is you're going to take them to the Bible and show them biblical patterns, how to manage your money, including debt and so on and so forth, and covetousness and so on. You're going to use the Bible and teach them with the pattern. A pattern is you make something with a pattern. Moses was said, make it exactly according to the pattern I showed you. And same with a couple in marriage. They have marriage problems, or they're going to get married. Well, you're going to sit down with them and you're going to show them this is what, according to the Bible, this is what a marriage looks like. This is success. This is the picture of it. In these are the verses and so on. But when a man comes to you and says, I think God's called me to be a missionary, where do you take them in the Bible?
You don't. It's all existential.
It is. That's the problem.
Meaning, I felt the Lord guiding me to this particular region.
I went to a conference, and they're honest people.
Absolutely.
Their heart is great, and I just felt God touched my heart, and there's a lot of emotion there. But I want to build on that pattern. And what we found out is we went out under a man's pattern, or maybe a philosophy of men. And
it reminds me of the lady. She's cooking a ham, and just before she put it in the oven, she cut both ends off the ham. And the daughter asked, she said, "Mom, why are you cutting both ends off the ham before you cook it?" She says, "Well, my mother always did it that way." And I said, "Well, did you ever ask your mom why she cut both ends off the ham?" And so they called up Grandma. Grandma says, my mother did it. Great Grandma's still around, so let's call her up. And so they call old great Granny up and say, "Why do you cut both ends off the ham?" So it's been done now for 4 generations, all the way down to the great granddaughter. And she said, "Well," he said, "the pan that I used to have wasn't big enough to hold the ham. I had to cut both ends off."
There was a good reason.
Right. And so I think it's the same thing with the colonial style, American style missions. There was good reason why they did the things that they did at that time.
And they were good people.
But
I'm not saying they're bad people.
And you can have something good and have a wrong format, and God wants to bless to the fullest extent possible. You also can have outliers and going outside the parameters of the pattern set forth in Scripture and be very successful. You can have some people, I've heard people make an argument that I don't think Billy Graham was even saved, because of, his affinity
methods
for the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope and everything else. Yeah. Every time Billy Graham would go preach somewhere, he'd contact the local archdiocese and, seek permission and cooperation and everything. And tens of thousands of people were saved. The Billy Graham Crusades, I've met tons of people that were saved there. And he was following an unbiblical model, yet people were getting saved. And so I can look at that and say, well, I mean, God used the message of the gospel. Is there some problems there? Yes. Because when someone receives Christ and they go back to the Roman Catholic Church, they're not going to live the victorious Christian life.
Yes.
That's just one of the many different problems that we see. So I think you could have a ministry, and a lot of parachurch ministries, they're great, but they're not patterned after the biblical model.
Yes.
Some of them on paper are very successful.
Yes.
But once again, we say, well, did the Bible give us all things for faith and practice? Okay. Well, let's try to stick as close as we can to the pattern found in Scripture, because that's the pattern that's going to ultimately work.
Amen. You got it. It took me a life to understand that regarding missions.
Yes.
And I want to just be clear that I think we have the same goal. We want to have influence on the world. We want the lost of the world, those that have never heard Jesus or fully understood truth. They've never been able to come to acknowledging of the truth because it's come in bits and pieces and sound bites and on news and American TV and so on. We want them to understand who God is and what God expects of them and what they can expect of God, including salvation, including prayer, including joy and peace. We want the same things, but to do that, we can call ourselves missionaries or we call ourselves evangelists, whatever we want to do that. We're only going to be successful. Having the right motive is not enough.
No.
We have to also follow God's methods. And the whole thesis of my book is we need to bring our process back into a biblical process. Not that the people are bad, their people are wonderful. Let's help them. Let's be more efficient with God's money and with God's people. We're going to do that. And we're going to please God when we trust what he said, when we follow the pattern. First, we have to find the pattern, and it's in there. There's a lot of examples of reaching out to people, but it doesn't match our way. And, I hope the book, I wrote the book for two groups of people. One, missionaries that feel like they failed.
Right.
And they feel like they've washed up and so on. Please read the book. We failed you by sending you in that direction under that format. We didn't know. We were ignorant. The other is
and again, so if you're a missionary and you went on deputation, hometown hero, sent off big hoopla, went to the field and just got burnt out.
Yeah.
So Brother Scott's saying, maybe in the back of your mind, you feel like an absolute failure because I thought I was called to missions and I went there and I burn out. We'll say, okay, well, where in Scripture do you see someone, going into some area that they have no association with, dragging their family along and not knowing anybody, not being with anybody, and just indefinite period of time going there? I say that's not there. And so if you went and, you came back, you're not a failure.
Exactly.
By the Bible metric.
I love you. You're a hero. Please re-examine the process we sent you in. We were a failure because we sent you under a wrong pretext. The other is for young couples, usually young, not always young, but people that feel like, I want to be a missionary. I haven't been there before, and I just feel the call. I really have a burden for this people group. It's outside of where I live now and so on. Please read the book. Read the Bible. But before you do anything, before you get married, before you adjust your finances, find the pattern that God has laid out and follow that pattern. You'll find success. If you veer off without God's word behind you, you might do it. Because you're exceptional, but why? It's so much easier to just obey God. It's the right thing to do.
You follow that pattern. And the old saying is you'll either fail miserably or succeed more miserably.
Exactly.
And so there's a lot of ministries out there that, again, there's a success in the way that, they can draw attention to themselves and the amount of funds that are being raised. You talk about the economics. I would say for a young couple, it'd probably take them $500,000 before they got to the field.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
And then once you get to the field,
it's going to take you a year to get language school.
And it's going to cost you $100,000 a year minimum to be on, even in a lot of times third world countries. If you're going someplace like Europe or one of these places that are more expensive, you're raising $150,000 a year, and we're just getting started. Or at the same time, what could that amount of money do for instance, in a place like Vietnam?
Yeah.
To where there's people reaching their own group
through the Vietnamese.
They're already integrated into that culture.
Yeah.
They already have a network of people that they know.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like China when they kicked out American missionaries. Guess what? Christianity's done better than ever.
Yeah.
And it's funny to hear some people talk sometimes. And again, I'm trying to redeem myself by the end of this podcast as far as supporting. But they talk like they're the great white hope.
Yeah.
that they're going to go to these backward brown people, and they're going to teach them how to get things done. Where I'm thinking, no, there's a lot of stuff that we should learn from them. They probably have a lot of stuff to teach us.
I went to Pastor Bin one time. He's a big Vietnamese pastor. I mean, he's powerful. Church was running about 2,000. It's in Saigon, and so it's open, relatively open. And I asked him once, Lucy and I had him over for dinner, him and his wife, and I asked him, Pastor, what can I do for you? How can I help you? He was shocked. He put down his chopsticks. He goes, Teacher, I've met probably 5 other foreign missionaries like you, and you're the first ones that ask how they could help me. Mm-hmm. They usually come in, and I hate to see them walk into church because they'll siphon the back row people off. Uh-huh. They'll invite them to their house for quote-unquote Bible study.
Okay.
What they use them for is photo ops.
Sure.
So they have enough photos for the year.
Sure.
They'll dispense them when they need them, when they write letters. But they just use my people, and they don't bring them back. They just waste them.
Sure.
And they make great photos, I guess. You're the first one that's actually said, how can I help you? He was just shocked that we didn't want something from him.
Sure.
So what he was saying was just
that the American, in his experience, this is him.
Yes.
That the American people that come to help, quote unquote, are actually more of a hindrance and hurt the ministry more. Evangelist Doug Whiteside.
Yeah.
He used to preach back at First Bible in the day, and the big blowouts there they had a week long. He was on the podcast probably 2 or 3 months ago. That was a great episode. If someone's listening, they missed it. I asked him, it's one of these random questions I'll ask guests sometimes. I said, if you had $1 million to invest in the mission field, now he's traveled all over the world, and he's of the same exact, he'd be amen, and I think about everything that we're saying. and I'm sure he he still has to preach at churches, so I'm sure he put clause after clause. Well, I'm not saying that, he'd have to say that. Yeah. I don't have to do that. I'm stuck in a church, I don't have to, have open doors. But he was saying that he would invest every dime into truly autonomous, indigenous, churches in different regions of the world, and just play a supportive role to the Christians that are already there. And he gave the testimony on the podcast about this guy in Siberia that had started like 26 churches. And somehow he came across this guy in his journey to Siberia, and he said this on the podcast. He said, I said, do not associate with any American. He says, they will ruin your ministry. He says they're going to take credit for it. He said they're going to be telling you what to do. Now, here is this guy. I don't know one single guy in America that has started 26 churches and successfully and have them all running. And so he said they're going to try to take credit for it. And he says, the guy didn't listen to me. And the next time I go, he said the whole thing was messed up.
Well, again, that points to our system. It's not American people. It's the system. The missionaries, because I'm one of them. You feel the pressure to perform. Mm-hmm. You feel you just can't write home and say, this month I was just miserable. I sulked. I watched TV. I didn't do it. You just can't tell the truth. Mm-hmm. I'm just homesick and I didn't feel good and I hate this place and so on. You can't do that. So you gotta borrow. I use the term cardboard cathedral. I've seen it's the system.
When you say cardboard cathedral, you're saying that for the prayer letter.
Yeah,
we get a whole bunch of people together by having some sort of a giveaway.
Yeah, exactly. We throw up a church for that Sunday morning and take a lot of photos, and it comes back down again. And the housekeeper's family that you hired to play church goes home, and they don't even know what they just did. They just know they made $5.
Right.
Right. Crazy.
Yes.
Crazy.
So for missions, What's the solution then? What do you think that we ought to be focusing on? If you're listening to this, we're not saying to drop all your missionaries that are on the field or anything like that.
No, don't
we
do
support
that.
missionaries that are there.
Honor the guys that you support.
Absolutely. And but we're calling this Rethinking Missions.
Yes.
So perhaps, in the next 10, 20 years, you might want to rethink about how you invest your missionary dollars.
Yeah, use the Bible. Use the Bible for, if you're a good pastor or you're a good teacher, you're using the Bible for all the other patterns that you teach, facets of life. And these people their whole life is given to this. I've done this twice. I've sold everything I own twice. My whole life is given to this industry. I think I know I know a little bit. Now, I'm Vietnam specific. I understand it's going to be different in some fields. But the general idea is I would plead with you, before you invest your life, find the pattern in the Bible. Mm-hmm. Be sure of where you're going. Be sure that this is God's pattern. And that's a healthy thing in anything you do. And then when you get into it, have fun. Go full blast. Mm-hmm. Enjoy it. You'll have great influence and you'll have peace. And God will bless you for exercising faith. Because you want to influence the lost world. You want God's name proclaimed around the globe. Good for you. Me too. Mm-hmm. And you want God's name proclaimed locally as well. Good. God is worthy. We want to worship God that way. We want to have influence, but we want to do it God's way. Please be sure you're following God's plan in anything you do in your life.
So how's your role in Vietnam changed? I mean, what do you do now when you go to Vietnam?
For the last maybe 10 years, 12 years, we say DD-VV. I go back and forth. Mm-hmm. Usually, COVID's exception, but usually about 4 times a year. Mm-hmm. I get the flights when they're cheap. Mm-hmm. I am a Scot, so. Yeah. And I go back and I teach. I meet the groups that I know, and I meet some new ones, and I do seminars. Mm-hmm. And we go to their church, or we go to a meeting area. If it's out in the country, we meet in a kind of a secret area. Mm-hmm. And I teach the pastors some basic things. Lately, I've been just teaching. This time going over, it's marriage counseling, because they get none of it. Mm-hmm. Last time it was types of Christ in the Old Testament. Open up the Old Testament, see Jesus in there, see he's on every page. They're just fascinating. That's one thing we have as Americans that they don't have. We have libraries of information. Mm-hmm. They have libraries of faith that we lack, but we have information. So I share them information. What I tell the young man, I give them truth. And I expect them to take a nugget of truth, whether it's honor your father and mother or whatever it is, and practice it. Mm-hmm. See God work and build. Take that step. I just encourage them with truth. They have to make decisions. They have to grow.
And so you play a supportive role in the churches that are already over there, and then the pastors that are already over there. Mm-hmm. You play a supportive role with. And then also, if there is some sort of financial need, you try to make churches aware in the States.
We have industry. It's called quilling cards, whereas girls, we've found that girls are really susceptible to the sex trades and so on. We have a house called the New Life House. It's converted to the New Life Church. It was a dormitory, a safe house for these kids. And so many got saved that they asked, can we just have church here? And so now it's New Life Church. And now we're building another church, New Life number 2. So it's so successful. These kids get saved, they get grounded, they live in the same dormitory. Then they go out in groups of 5 or 6. They go back out in the countryside to visit their parents. They testify. They can say things and do things that if a foreigner was with them, it'd just be, what's the foreigner want? What's he want? What's he want? Yeah. It would just be, I'd be a distraction. I'd be a problem. Mm-hmm. But they get grounded and they grow. We have always ongoing projects, building projects. What I think the most is I try to meet what do they need the most, Right now, they need the most is specific training on topics.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, they asked me, can you teach about marriage? So Lucy and I are we're going to put together a package. And we'll go to a church, and we'll be there 3 nights and so on, and they'll bring other churches together.
Yeah, and you're teaching teachers. I mean, you're teaching pastors and laymen and
exactly
all these things. And it's a supportive role.
And then they take it. I put it in PowerPoint. It's converted to Vietnamese. And then I give them those little thumb drives, and then they take it back through. Right now, all through the country, they're using the material we left from when we were there in June. And they teach it over and over and over again. I'm having more, Pastor, honestly, I'm having more influence in Vietnam with Vietnamese than when I lived there.
How is this monetarily, how do you say that? Monetary wise, how is this more economical than what you were doing before?
It's about 60% of the funds that come to us are used for projects in Vietnam now. Mm-hmm. When we lived there as a family, I would be glad if I had 5% left over.
Sure.
Because it's so much more expensive especially with a large family. I had 4 daughters. Mm-hmm. All of our resources were consumed with living there and staying alive and safe.
Now, how come missionaries have such large families?
Gee, I might have to pass on that one.
I'll answer it because they can afford to.
It gets pretty lonely over there.
I know, yeah, right. Yeah, you gotta talk to somebody. I mean, if you don't have kids. But yeah, so that is funny. Yeah, missionaries a lot of times have big families. And so if you were a pastor, and again, you're rethinking missions, next 10 or 20 years, let's take it slow.
Yeah.
No one likes change. Right. So Robert's laws of power there, preach change, but don't change because people hate change. Yep. So if you're changing things the next 10 to 20 years, what would you look for as far as like with your missions budget? Like what would your investment be in?
Well, that's a good question. I would not cut. If you've got traditional missionaries, I think you would be unwise. You're going to lose God's blessing if you just pull them out because you've changed your philosophy. They didn't change their philosophy.
No.
Why would you do that?
Yeah, you should be a gentleman and.
But I would think I would work in training. I would teach the principles of the pattern, find the pattern, and let the church move with you. Let them, don't get ahead of the church. Learn what, if this makes sense and the things in the book make sense, teach it to the people.
There's a lot of guys out there like yourself too that are working, and some are pastoring churches at the same time. Like Brother David Barnhouse, he lived in Zambia, and he travels back and forth. But yeah, he's gone on this whole thing with me too. He says like for $150 a month, he's got good men that he can support as pastors, and they're working boots on the ground. They grew up there. I mean, they can live at a different economic level than you and I could ever live. Mm-hmm. He said we've got missionaries with live in some compound with satellite dishes on their roof and guard dogs and everything else like that, and rarely come out. And for the support that's going into that guy, I can support, churches, orphanages, schools, build. They can build church buildings. I can have, and this is every year they can do this.
Have great influence. And that's what we want.
Yes,
that's what we want.
And
I think each church has to decide. Like I can't say.
And you think there's a lot of pastors out there that need to get involved in missions, maybe taking a couple weeks a year and going and
that would be good. Pastors are the busiest people in the world and the most overworked. And I don't expect, but if they could go, and you've had people that sit here in this chair that have gone with me, and I think it's enlightening. I also bring Vietnamese here to the States for a couple of weeks. We'll do a seminar. We'll do a missions conference with the people. Imagine that. Mm-hmm. Have a missions conference with the end product right there.
Right.
How can we help you at the end? But again, I guess if I could leave whether you're a missionary or a pastor or if I could leave with one thought, would you just consider, and I try to say this gracefully, and I know some of my sarcasm in the book comes through. I'm trying to get your attention, but please consider that missions and missionaries, they're good people. You're sending very good people, often young people. They're often your favorite people. They're often your relatives. Would you at least consider that there's a possibility of several methods apart from the traditional method? I'm not saying scrap your method. I'm not saying do something radical. Would you at least consider and pray, God, is there a better way we can do this, that we can help our people? We can be more efficient. We can be more effective. We want to send people to influence the world, but we don't want them to get hurt.
Right.
We love these people. God, am I missing something? Should I be finding, is there some truth that I haven't hooked up to? And then, Lord willing, you'll find that you'll gravitate, you'll have the freedom to gravitate to a process improvement without hurting the people. That's what I want. I don't want I don't want to hurt people.
You know, and you think about it, sending a young couple, and there's something exciting about being young and you're visionary. You want to give your life to something that counts and something that matters. I mean, it's kind of the old, between the ages of 18 and 22, I know a guy's brain hasn't even developed yet. He doesn't even have an adult brain till he's about the age of 22, sometimes 25. That's why a young guy will get in a car and drive 150 miles an hour, do stupid stuff. That's why he'll go fight in war. Yeah. 18 to 22-year-olds, because they're the only ones stupid to do that. And generally, when you get older, you're like, I ain't going to do that. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. For what? Yeah.
Right. And so there's no hurdles, there's no bars, there's no steps. Like the ministry is intricate. The ministry is, you were talking about this earlier, is that it took you so long to learn certain things. There's so much to learn and grow in, where you're sending, if you're sending a 22-year-old or a 25-year-old to the mission field, you were like sending, it'd be kind of like laying on this table and expecting a nurse or to perform brain surgery on yourself. Like there's not the experience there. There's not the there's no ministry experience. Sometimes educational experience is low. Go to a foreign field, learn the language, integrate in the culture, and do all these things. It's just an overwhelming ask of somebody. Yet we do it all the time, and then we're upset because they come back home. Yes. Or really, as a pastor, I'm thinking, good night. You're 24. I know. I barely knew anything at 34, let alone 24.
Yeah, God bless you. I appreciate their heart. They're good people. Pastor, maybe you can just rein them in and say, let's look. Say I've got a burden for Chinese people, whatever, any group, name a people group, Asian.
Right.
Well, probably in a city near me, there's a university with 5,000 Chinese students that you don't have to quit your job. Your wife would see you at night, and you could have Christmas with your parents, and your kids could grow up normal, and you could enjoy your home church.
And why don't you make a trip over there once a year for the next 10 years? And, see how that goes.
Meet their parents, meet their pastor, and so on. Find out where they lived, and make relationships. Wow, that would almost be biblical.
Yes. Yes. And you see that once again, if you went back to the biblical model, typically people minister to the people from which they were called. And, why do I pastor in New York? And a guy sent me a picture today. Well, it was a picture of Kathy Hochul And I guess you just said that, the 5.4 million Republicans that are in the state of New York need to leave or something. I don't know if that's true, but I wouldn't be surprised. I know Cuomo said that, the religious right needs to leave the state of New York. They do not belong here. So this guy's from Montana, and he took a picture of the sunset, and he says, "When are you coming home?" And he's a former soldier and former church member of mine. And so why in the world am I in New York? Yeah. Well, I tell you why. It's because this is the land of my nativity. This is the area that I grew up in, and this is the area that I'm burdened for.
Our family's here.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. And so I see the need, and that's why I'm here. And most likely, again, that's going to be the biblical pattern. Another thing I think for pastors too is also this is, so far, we'll see by the end of the Biden administration whether or not this is still true, but it's the great cash cow, America. So we do have extra funds to invest, and that's exciting, into the Lord's work overseas. And so we can help out. I know last year we had a surplus in the missions budget. We were able to give $15,000 to down in Mexico. Mexican ministries that we're doing a college dormitory for a Bible Institute down in college. And again, it was Mexicans teaching their own, reaching Mexico with so there's different other outlets I think that might be a lot better of investment with our missions money and just doing the typical, again, colonial style ministry.
There's a dark side to missions. Again, I'm not trying to paint everybody with a broad brush, but we've seen a lot of shenanigans.
So if you and I, just for the sake of everybody listening, wanted to tell horror stories about con artists, we could have been talking, we'd read it an hour, we'll wind it down and quit. But we could have spent the last hour telling horror stories about people who scammed tens of thousands of dollars and really did nothing. And again, it all goes back to the accountability. We believe in the local church. Now, here's a bad thing about the local church. Your parachurch organization is not going to get the glory. But if you just invest in the local New Testament church, only Jesus is going to get the glory.
That's tough.
That's terrible. And so, if you're involved in a local New Testament church, like we're saying, if I'm a pastor and I'm lazy, it's going to come back to bite me.
Yeah.
If I'm a nasty, mean guy, it's going to come back to bite me. Yeah. Same thing if you're a deacon as well, if you're one of those two offices. But since, missionary is, again, the word missionary is not in the Bible. It's some existential thing that you kind of get the defined terms. Yeah. If I could say that I'm a missionary to Webster instead of a pastor, and therefore I could raise funds to, I remember when I was a military pastor right outside the gates of Fort Drum, it was a self-supporting, still is, to support their pastor full-time, self-sustaining, self-supporting military church. I mean, there were some locals there, but right outside the gate of Fort Drum, and I'd have people call me that were starting military ministries. And again, and I said, listen, you called the wrong guy.
Well, I've had pastors angry at me because I've been canceled before the word was popular because I don't fit the missionary mold as they think of it. But I just say, well, what mold is that? What pattern do you? Well, you got to live there 3 years, come back for 6 months, and go back for 3. You got to live in the. So where I understand the pattern. I'm very familiar with your pattern, but where in the Bible did you find that? Well, brother, and this and that. And it's like, how can you judge me as a poor missionary or as no missionary or some lesser? And I'm not saying the other guys are any better or worse. We're all the same. We're as good as the next guy, and that there's none good, no, not one. I understand that, but our hearts are good. How can you judge he's a good or a bad missionary when there's no standard? The standard is in your imagination.
It's no criteria.
Yeah,
no requirements.
So it's trouble.
Do you think that times have changed a little bit and people are opening up their minds a little bit more to?
Yes.
Because it seems to me like a lot more people are working with nationals in different countries and
I felt like
doing what you're doing.
I felt like I was the only one. I know I wasn't, but when we started this, but now, especially with COVID, A lot of our guys were forced to stay home, stay in the States. And yet they found that, hey, I can Zoom preach too. And I can reach out. I can still have an oar in the water. And they probably have found out that they have as much influence now. And their families are safer and sound and all those things that are important to God as much as outreach to a foreign, don't sacrifice your family. It just tears me up. You made a promise to that little lady. You take care of her, take care of your kids. It's tough enough just being there. But when you're away, it's even worse. But yeah, you're right. I think there's more coming around, and frankly, the traditional method is just, it wears them down. They're grinding out. Every missionary that left the school when I graduated, whenever that was, 97 or something, 98. I think every one of them is back in the States.
Sure.
For different reasons. Are they good, or are the guys that stayed on the field, are they better or worse? Oh, I think they're outstanding. I think these guys are exceptional. But I'm not worried about them. I'm worried about average guys like me.
Sure. Sure.
God doesn't call you have an exceptional gene. You can do that. You can violate my principles and go ahead and be successful. And oftentimes, honestly, a lot of those guys they're not really missionaries. They're pastors that live in a different place.
Sure.
And they settle in a little group and so on, and they write letters.
They kind of got a groove, yeah.
Yeah. And that, God bless them. I am not putting you guys down. I love you guys. But to do the things that we wanted to do and the things we were going to do, I'll speak for myself. I was attempting to do them outside of God's pattern. And I've mentioned that before. It's just a recipe for disaster. Please find the pattern in the Bible. Stay to it. Like Moses would admonish. See to it.
Yes.
Thou do all things exactly to the pattern.
Yes. Yeah, and you see Joshua, I think it says in the book of Joshua, 6 or 7 times, all that God commanded Moses. That's what Joshua did. He followed the pattern, and he was successful in conquering the promised land. So, hey,
and you can still have a conference. You can still eat casseroles and get fat and, ruin your transmissions and, haul your kids around if you want to do that. But
rethink.
Yeah.
Rethink missions.
Yeah.
Go to the Bible.
Yeah, go to the
Bible. Try to figure out the pattern. And if you need some help, email us at pastorthoughtsmail@gmail.com, and we'll send you your very own free copy of Missions by Design.
Thank you, Pastor.
The biblical pattern for fulfilling the Great Commission. Thank you, Brother Scott. Hey, where can folks locate you at?
Well, they can email me at pwscott61@gmail.com. That's P as in Paul, W as in Wesley, SCOTT 61. That's when I was born, at gmail.com.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for being on. And it was great today because I invited you here, and you took me out to lunch, and you paid for it. So
and it was Vietnamese dinner.
Yeah, it was wonderful food, and so you're welcome on the podcast anytime.
Thanks for having me.
All right, God bless. Thank you so much for watching or listening to the Pastoral Thoughts Podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us at pastorthoughtsmail@gmail.com. Also, if you want to check out more about our ministry here, you can visit pastorjack.org. I do have a blog that I do write. I'd love to have you as one of my subscribers there. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening. God bless you.